You're listening to OPIS Talks, where you'll be in on conversations with insiders in the energy, chemicals, and environmental commodities markets. Guests share insights into the latest trends and innovations, industry challenges, and much more. Let's dive into the conversations that explore where the energy economy is headed, right here on OPIS Talks.
Hello, my name is Mariana Santos Moreira, Thought Leadership Director at Chemical Market Analytics under Dow Jones Energy, and with me today is Anton Schweitzer, co-founder and business developer at BSC Methanol, which specializes in carbon capture utilization and power-to-methanol technologies. Welcome, Anton. Thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you very much for inviting me to the podcast.
Yeah, it should be an exciting one. So just before we start, I wanted to set the scene for our audience. The global methanol market is being heavily disrupted. There are very different levers, such as the Middle East conflict and China's industrial policy shifts. All of this is heavily influencing the supply landscape. And then at the same time, we have the energy transition, which is also a major factor to consider. And the progress on this front will significantly impact both the supply and demand for methanol in the future. And one key region driving the energy transition is Europe, where policy is also focusing on creating demand for low carbon methanol. But Europe's position as a premium methanol market is also under intense pressure. The region has become increasingly dependent on deep-sea imports due to extremely high merchant natural gas prices, and those have forced domestic units to be idled or run at reduced rates. But we also know that at challenging times, that's when the most innovative solutions come as well, right? So today, Anton and we will have a conversation where Anton will guide us through some of the key technologies that BSC Methanol has developed to fill these evolving market needs. So without further ado, Anton, I asked this question to my colleague Maya in a previous interview, but I would also like to get your views as an industry participant because it's a pressing issue. So I want to start with that. Has the current crisis in the Middle East changed the landscape for low carbon methanol projects at all? And if so, has it been a more localized shift, more regional, or is it more of a global impact?
So, thank you very much for the introduction. Yes, it has taken a hard shift in the past, I would say, 12 months. But with that shift comes also a new opportunity, as you already mentioned, especially energy independency is a largely growing topic currently in the industry. And I think methanol, specifically e-methanol, can fill both gaps, once on the climate friendly side and once on the energy supply side, that we're able to utilize the power infrastructure that we have accordingly and really exploit everything that we were able to produce rather than only using the power that is produced in peak times. So I believe that e-methanol, yes, is under pressure on the sustainable side, but really is also a possibility in this kind of situation rather than being completely under pressure like basically only hydrogen, in our opinion.
That makes sense. And actually, you obviously have a very privileged view of the low carbon methanol market here. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about your technology offers, actually. So I know that you offer this flex methanol advanced modular technology, and I wanted you to please explain what this really entails. And I'm particularly interested in understanding how many tons of methanol each of these modules can produce and how your clients can use this output. Do they commercialize it? Do they use it as an input for their own products? Do they use it as a fuel? What can you tell us about that?
So we have developed two key modules. One is the 10 megawatt and 20 megawatt module. It's called Flex Methanol. And basically the Flex stands for that we're able to take the power input for the electrolyzer on a flexible manner. What does that mean specifically is we see that it's important if we're talking about energy to a feedstock or energy to a product basically, we have to really look on the input side. That means we say we can produce in times where the power is available rather than to have a flat line of power input. And that gives us the opportunity to really peak shave in power markets. That also means that we're able to really produce over a wind and solar profile, for example. And that I think is a huge benefit when we're talking about power demand, specifically when we're talking about PPAs that a lot of these projects require, is you have to be able to produce as produced, because it is significant to think about the power side. That's why we're seeing a lot of projects that also have a very high levelized cost on methanol, because it always has to be the average power price. And where we see our clients heading more and more to, we had a huge shift towards the maritime fuel in 2022 and 2023, when Maersk was the pioneer who announced it, that they're going to use methanol for shipping. But now we really see it more in niche markets and more subsidize the conventional methanol that is in the market. So we see it at local producers where they're asking, okay, what is happening with my supply in future? The situation in the Middle East is promoting this kind of a technology. But also we see it currently, there has been a large effect on the RFNBO side, on the THG saving quotas in Germany. So under the RED III, it is very interesting to add methanol into the road transport sector. And that's where we see the market heading currently.
It's quite interesting that you mention methanol for fuel, because this is something that my colleague Maya also brought up quite a few times, is the fact that in Europe you actually have quite a bit of support from the policy side for demand of low carbon methanol and specifically for fuels. So clearly that is a very important space to watch. Do you see any potential for working with refineries to help decarbonize their operations? I ask this because a lot of our clients work in the petrochemical space, so this might be a very interesting use.
That's actually very interesting. And we actually do see that coming up more and more, especially as hubs. So what we believe is, as our system is also utilizing the approach of decentralized production units, means that the production units themselves, we also could see at refineries, but we see the refineries more as a hub where you take the methanol and then transform it to the product that is required. So that is more like the classical way how refineries work with the methanol as well. And we also believe that, for example, when we're coming to more and more SAF production, that refineries can play a fundamental role in actually processing methanol to jet, or also methanol to kerosene. So we see them in the upgrading of the methanol as quite significant and strong players in the market.
That is something that I see future for that as well, right? I think it's a big part of the market is the refining side of it. And especially as we see some fuel demand erosion and so on, and we see more and more emission control across these industries, it could really be an interesting development space. I also noticed on the BSE Methanol's website that the efficiencies are much higher when we are comparing your different technologies, your different processes. The efficiencies are much higher when you're using the modules with the waste or biomass input. And that's higher than both the typical steam reforming process, which is very impressive, and BSE's own modular technology when you use renewable power and CO2 supply. This also actually seems to be more efficient than large-scale units. So I wanted to ask you, why is that?
We are coming from a side that is overlooking the entire picture. What we're argumenting with, or when we just purely look on the molecule sides, we are close to conventional transforming rates. But what we're seeing is in local applications, the waste heat from the process, from the electrolyzers, can be utilized in district heating. The moment we're able to use the waste heat, which is also a type of energy, we're able to increase our efficiency up to the 74%. And that is in our application also how we see the whole methanol process, where we're saying it has to be done over synergies rather than that the only end product is the methanol itself. That is also one specific reason why we're saying we want to become flexible, because we are flexible and we can utilize the flexibility, because we have to really use the synergies that the skid and the methanol synthesis gives us. That also means or translates to the use of oxygen and also the use of waste heat. And if we have this concept where everything is, or a complete integrated concept, we're getting very high efficiencies when we're using it from the entire process. And that is why the efficiency is that high, because the pure chemical efficiency, of course, is not at 74%. But we're talking about electrical efficiency.
I also wanted to ask you about your other technology, right? So when you're using renewable power and CO2 in your models as an input to your models, and I noticed on your website that it is less efficient than using a steam reformer. I also assume that even if that is the case, there are some regulatory and policy incentives to using this technology, right? So I also wanted to know if these are EU specific or if you foresee such policies to incentivize this use of your modules elsewhere.
So, of course, the technology itself is based on a complete green premium. So, that is where our calculation began and our adventure also began in 2019. When we were talking about, okay, how are we able to really use the type of sustainability boom that was happening? And it's also one reason why we're saying, okay, we want to go in the direction of being able to recycle carbon dioxide. So that means to give the carbon dioxide a new value and recycling it along the value chain rather than always emitting new carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And what we basically said is, yes, we came from that direction, but it is, in our opinion, it is not really a question between fossil or conventional and green. It has to be somewhere along both ways. And we believe that, of course, there are countries where e-methanol makes probably more sense just because you have a very centralized supply chain and a value chain. For example, in Switzerland, we see that a lot with the pharmaceuticals. And there, of course, it makes a lot of sense. And there, the green premium is not really that important compared to, for example, transport side. So, yeah, of course, there are green benefits to it, and there are incentives to produce green methanol. But in my personal opinion, a business case is then something attractive when you're able to create a certain value. And that can be on the green side, and that can also be on the conventional side. And also with our flexible technology, we are actually moving more and more into that direction as we believe in the synergies it can create.
That's very interesting. And you mentioned that case on the pharma side, which, yeah, it makes absolute sense with the margins that you can achieve on the pharma side. I also understand that you have memorandums of understanding signed in Africa as well. And
Yes.
I actually wanted to dive into this a little bit. You have MOUs in Nigeria and Angola. Are these modular reactors as well? And do you foresee this sort of technology to be widely used at a global scale? And what the incentives could be in regions outside of the EU, where maybe the margins are not as supportive of this?
That's a very interesting question. Of course, the whole green incentives in Africa are far less attractive and extensive as they are in Europe. But we're able to achieve something else in Africa with our technology is we're able to give rural areas an industry, a chemical industry that they might not have had before. Meaning we're able to utilize a lot of renewable power, flexible, without a lot of infrastructure, to really bring them a base chemical, what they can then also utilize or use in their processes and regain value from their resources. Also, when we're talking about comparing that to, for example, agricultural land. And there are certain types of lands where building something or growing crops is not as possible as, for example, building up PV panels. And that's why we think that alone that can bring a value to the production, either for exporting goods or for a local use that is highly interesting also in Africa, and where the incentives are not needed to actually create a business case in that sense.
That makes obviously perfect sense. And I mean, you're clearly at the forefront of new technological advancements in the low carbon methanol space, and you have a footprint across multiple regions at this point. So you must have a vision for the methanol industry in 20, 30 years' time. What do you expect the industry will look like as new technologies evolve, like your modular solutions? Do you think the market will become more fragmented? Do you think there will be like a clear dominant technology, perhaps per region? What do you think the market is going to look like?
I would like to generalize that on Power to X in general. I believe that the whole debate that we're having in Europe with constantly comparing green and gray alternatives, that should definitely come to an end. Because, in my opinion, it needs both ways of producing commodities and producing chemicals in future. We will not, or we're not seeing that there will be a complete shift to one or the other side. Because we're living in a fast-moving world where we have a lot of power that is every day is added that we're needing. So we see more a real variation of the P2X industry, also for hydrogen, for power to methane, power to ammonia, power to hydrocarbons over Fischer-Tropsch, and also power to methanol. And we see that the opportunity that renewable energy is able to give us a whole new resource that we're able and that we should use to its fullest extent rather than only to peak times.
Lovely. We will see how the market evolves then and check in again in a few years. All right. Thank you so much, Anton, for joining us today, for your valuable insights.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot more that can be said about these themes and methanol markets and Power to X of the future. And Anton will be a speaker at the upcoming World Methanol Conference in Rotterdam, the Netherlands, from the 29th of September to the 1st of October. So I'd like to invite our listeners to join us there to continue the conversation. And you can register now at chemicalmarketanalytics.com/WMC and by using promo code TPOD15, that's TPOD15, to take 15% of your registration. So thank you for tuning in, and we hope to see you in Rotterdam. Thanks again, Anton. Goodbye.
We hope you've enjoyed today's insider conversation on OPIS Talks. Join us next time for a deep dive into another industry insider's world. You can find more OPIS Talks episodes at opisnet.com/podcasts or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.